What is the scariest thing that ever happened to you? I have one, happened when I was in college, living in a relatively old house. I woke up one morning, I'm not much of a morning person so it was late morning, woke up, sat up in bed, looked to my right and there was a boy sitting in my chair which was next to my bed. He was looking straight ahead, not looking at me at all, about 12 years old, with blonde hair and a blue plaid shirt, kind of 70s style. My first thought was that he's not real, I'm still half asleep and partly kinda dreaming, so I sat up straighter and stretched to feel fully awake, but the boy was still there. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me or was hanging on to something from a dream, so I told myself if I close my eyes and count to 10, he will be gone when I open them. So, I did that, opened my eyes, and he was still there. He looked completely real, and I didn't feel any fear at all, just confusion as to why he was there. I kept looking at him, until eventually, really slowly, he faded away. I saw him fade away with my own eyes. This story is completely true, everyone I've told it to immediately jumps to ghost but I don't know about that because I was so calm and felt no fear. Yes. The exact same thing happened to me when I was a child, but it was a man sitting on the end of my sister's bed. Not all spirits have bad intentions. Some are just lost, trapped in a never-ending cycle of suffering and pain. Me IRL. My laundry was in the dryer, when I left to go to the store. When I came back, and checked the dryer, they were gone. I found them in with my last wash load, 2 days later. I threw a ring, in the house, in my room. Once, found it in my roommate's doorway. Second time, it was in the driveway. Lost my purse for days, one time, found it in a box, in my room, about a week or so, later. Lost my spelling book, when I was in school. Couldn't find it, for months, right before we had to pay for it, I found it in the floor of my bedroom, just as you walked in the door. At 5 YRS, I heard a ghostly, echoed moaning outside my bedroom. That's all I heard, was moaning. Saw my brother out the window, as I was doing dishes, and he had this creepy grin on his face, turned to ask why he had been outside, he said he never left the couch, he was sick. I am a writer. I wrote a beautiful poem, that somehow ended up deleted from my phone, I think I did it. When I get mad, that's what I do. LOL. It turned up on my phone, between 2 texts I had sent, after I had written it. It was a Christian poem. I was going back and forth with my faith. After my daughter passed, I had some dolls in her closet, on the shelf. Walked in, and one of the dolls was on the floor, socks and shoes removed. Was living back home at my mom's when I was 24. Was eating soup at the table. An empty bowl with a spoon in it was beside me. At the corner of my eye I can see an object moving. Ignored it.as it was just me and my brother was sleeping. The spoon started levitating. I got tingles up my spine. I look and the spoon drops into the bowl and starts spinning around the bowl aggressively. I don't know what to do or think. I just got up and walked out the house. Later woke up my brother and told him. Told me things happen there all the time. A man was murdered who lived there. He tends to walk around and mess with things. One Sunday at my last house, I recently moved, it was the middle of the day, but the house was dark and quiet. I was the only one awake and all of the blinds were closed with no lights on. At this point, I was 12, but I was still scared of the dark because of my anxiety. So, as I said before, the house was dark, but it wasn't pitch black. I was going to ask my parents something, and went the long way, because the hallway was too dark. This was a one-story house. The long way was through my living room, my kitchen, and my dining room, then to my parents' room when I turned left. I was at the opposite end of the hallway, next to the garage. I found that my parents were asleep. I didn't know that before this, so I was going to go back to my room. I decided that I was going to be brave, and walk to my room through the hallway. The hall closet was right next to the corner that I had to turn to get to my parents, and there was also a corner on the other side. In that corner, I saw a black figure sitting in the fetal position, not 5 feet from my parents' room. It had a bad energy that scared the living crap out of me, and I sprinted to my room and turned on my light. My family and I have had previous experiences with paranormal stuff, a wild lot, not just in this house either, that I could tell if anybody is interested. I have a pretty scary one. It was when I was a kid around 8 or 9 years old. We had moved into a trailer house, not mobile, and my mom had put up a plastic-looking wood as a wall to create a room for my little brother since the house was quite big lol. But he wouldn't really sleep there since it was scary at night and you could hear sounds of someone walking around the house. My mom had bought a computer and she installed it in her room right next to the door, and from that position you could see my bedroom, room, me brother's door, the hallway and the entrance to the kitchen. I remember this extremely clear. I was so scared. My mom had left to do something, can't remember what, so I was super excited because I could finally use the computer. This was back in 2005 to 2006 and I remember starting the computer, waiting for it to do its thing, and I remember my brother was in my room watching TV, so I was looking at the computer and at my bedroom room, keeping an eye on my brother lol. And as soon as I saw it was ready to work, I slightly glanced at the door and I see a weird figure at the kitchen entrance, so I yell at my brother asking what he was doing. He said he was still watching TV, so I look at the hallway again and see a little girl standing there. I remember her clear as water. She was about 5 or 6 years old. She was a small pale girl with black hair to the length of her shoulders. She was wearing a pastel green dress with a white ribbon on her waist, black shoes and white socks. I was so shocked and scared that I looked back at the computer and back at the hallway. That's when I saw her again. She was standing right next to my bedroom door and a wound had appeared on her chest like she had gotten stabbed. The dress was covered in blood and she was smiling and said something that I didn't hear as she walked into my room. I was so scared I ran into my room telling my brother we had to leave. I waited a bit to see if my mom was coming back and I heard noise, so I decided to leave and go to our neighbor's house, but till this day, after 14 to 15 years later, I remember that incident like it was yesterday. When I was younger, in the late 80s, I was at a sleepover at a friend's house. During the day when it was still light, we were out playing and came in the house when her mom came home from the grocery store. I wasn't inside long when we heard something fall in the other room. We all rushed in and there was a picture on the ground. My friend nonchalantly said, "Wow mom, the picture is all the way in this room this time." As a kid, we ask a lot of questions, and I was full of them. What do you mean this time? How did it get here? What happened? Etc. Her mom hastily picked up the picture off the floor and said, "We don't talk about this," and rehanged it. Rehung? Never sure which word to use. Anyway, the rest of the day was fine. We all ate together and we played in my friend's room. No big deal. As we were getting ready for bed, my friend, nonchalantly again, told me, "Oh hey, if you hear footsteps or something it's fine. Just ignore it." I fell asleep for only a few hours when I woke up with a start. It was around 2 ish according to her alarm clock. I didn't hear footsteps per se, more of noise a heavier long dress makes when it runs across the floor. I looked in the direction of the door and there was someone walking by it and looked in at us like she was checking in. This person was a woman about her mom's age and hair length in a long nightgown, so I thought maybe her mom was making sure we were sleeping. The next morning, we were all eating breakfast and I said something along the lines of, "You were walking around late last night, I saw you." Her mom just looked at me and was silent, but my friend said, "Oh, the lady was walking around again." I was like, "Lady?" And my friend said, "Yeah, she's a ghost." I tried arguing that it couldn't be a ghost because ghosts are see-through and float. I only knew ghosts from movies like Ghostbusters, but her mom stopped us saying, "We aren't talking about this anymore." I never stayed the night again but have thought about it from time to time as I got older. I wonder why my friend was seemingly cool with it all and her mom seemed so scared about it. I never asked, and soon after staying the night, they moved out of town, so I never got to ask. Another one was when I lived by myself in college. I lived in an old building in Dubuque which is next to the Mississippi River. I didn't live there long and one night while I was doing dishes, I thought I heard some people having a conversation. I turned off the water and listened, and clear as day, someone said hey, not angrily, but more like they were saying hey to some across campus. It scared me but I didn't feel threatened or anything, so I kept on doing things like normal. Several times when I was in the living room I would hear what sounded like dishes being thrown in the kitchen. The first few times I went in to check but nothing was broken or on the ground, so I figured if the place had ghosts, they were probably more residual than anything else. Around Christmas, I had lights wrapped around the bar going up the stairs. A few different times the lights would go on and off in a running pattern then stop. They weren't those kind of lights, just regular ones, so I thought the ghosts were just having fun. Whatever, right? A month or so later, my boyfriend at the time came over. He came over a few times before this night and I let him know that he may hear things and it isn't a big deal, but he just brushed it off. On that night, we started having an argument. I was standing in the middle of the kitchen and as he started to walk into the kitchen while yelling at me when my cup of change I had sitting in the middle of the top of the fridge flew off and shattered on the ground. We both just stared at it for a bit and I said something like, "That's never happened." He was so scared he didn't say anything as we cleaned it up. Afterwards, we were sitting in the living room when I tried bringing it up again and he cut me off saying it wasn't a ghost, the cup must have vibrated off there, nothing would have caused it to vibrate, and it fell off on its own, with force from a few feet away. Later on, he said he just didn't want to think it was a ghost because it freaked him out and he didn't want to be too scared to come over again. He ended up moving in and although nothing like that happened again, we'd still hear the dishes crashing noises. After living there for a bit, he started saying, "Oh, sounds like the ghosts are at it again," but he wasn't freaked out anymore. Part of me thinks that even though the crashing dishes were probably residual, the glass flew like that because my ghost was trying to protect me during that argument. My boyfriend wouldn't have ever physically hurt me but he was walking in the room fast while we were arguing, so how was my ghost to know? I like to think the one who said hey was the same one who did that. One more, sorry. Different town, different apartment. This one was a basement of a ranch house that was converted into an apartment. It was a terrible place with brown recluse spiders, snakes, and one of those half ovens, that could even fit a cookie sheet. Anyway, nothing too crazy happened. One night I was sleeping on the couch because my then husband was sick and sleeping in the bed. I kept hearing him shuffle to and from the bathroom all night. There was a divider wall between the living room and the path from the bedroom to bathroom, so I couldn't see anything. The next day, I asked if he was doing okay because I heard him go to and from the bathroom and he looked at me odd and said he didn't get up once. Not too long after, I adopted a 2-month-old puppier. He and I were super attached and he was a typical happy puppier, but every once in a while he'd stalk to one of the corners of the living room or sometimes the TV when it was turned off and would stare at it for a second, then back up with his ears down growling and would snap, then run back over to me. A few days later, my landlord and her young daughter moved into the top part of the ranch house. I would wake up almost nightly to her daughter's alarm clock playing music, loudly. After a couple of weeks of it, I spoke with the landlord asking about the music. She was a little nervous but chuckled and said that yeah, she has to go in her daughter's room and turn it off every night because it wakes her up as well. Her daughter apparently didn't like sleeping in that room either, she slept with her mom, so it wasn't her. I told her about the few experiences I had and she said the family she bought the ranch house from had a son who killed himself in the basement and they couldn't stand to live there anymore, understandingly. She converted the place herself and we were the first ones to rent it. I divorced my husband not long after and moved out. My mom and I had just came back from my ex's visitation/funeral and needless to say I was exhausted and wore out from crying, so we just went to bed. I was just staying at her house for the night, so I slept in her bed and she slept on the couch. We were both asleep until I woke up around 3-something am and as soon as my eyes adjusted, I look up and I shit you not, floating above the end of the bed was a figure and all I saw was from the waist down where it looked like pajama pants before I hauled ass out of there and woke my mom up. As fast as I moved, you would have thought the house was on fire. I was shaking. My mom tried to rationalize it and was more pissed that I woke her up, but I was so frightened. She tried to tell me to go back to sleep, but there was no way that was happening. I reluctantly went back in there and basically laid there scared out of my wits with the lamp left on. Part of me thinks it could have been my ex saying goodbye, cause it's just way too coincidental seeing him in a casket and then a figure later. I guess I'll never know cause I didn't stick around to see a face. My first time actually seeing something. I've heard plenty of things. I was driving my buddy home from work about 2:30 am. It was a clear night. I get off the highway at the same exit we always take. We're going to pass under a bridge, which is well lit, and see a figure walking over the median towards the road we're on. We're about 100 feet away. I'm at a full stop as a completely black figure crosses the street. Looks like a normal human shape. Couldn't make out any facial features, colors of clothes or clothing style. My headlights are right on it. Didn't even reflect light. Walking with a normal human gait and pace. As it got off the road I began to drive forward slowly. We would have passed it hopping the concrete barrier if it was a person, but it just kinda dissipated into the woods. Neither of us had ever experienced anything paranormal before. We drove that way 2 to 3 times a week, never saw anything like that again or any evidence of something that could cause that. I have quite a few paranormal experiences that I could talk about, as it's always felt spirits and things are drawn to me. But this one, by far, is the worst one. Here's a TLDR. My niece, only a year younger than me, I'm a late life child, was fond of doing seances with her friend. I was not fond of her doing seances. She always complained that she wasn't able to communicate with spirits and I politely asked her to stop multiple times. She didn't. One night, I'm fast asleep and having an awful dream about being followed by some unknown entity. When it touched me in my dream, my eyes shot open and I felt a cold whisper in my ear and something scratching my back. I had no idea what it said. I just remember it being guttural. I was paralyzed. My CD player turned itself on. I had my Flogging Molly CD in one of the trays inside. Woo, it was a boombox that could hold 5 CDs, and it skipped and repeated the lyrics, "You're on the devil's dance floor" twice and then shut off. I could move right after and grabbed my cross. I'm not religious, but it offered comfort. In hindsight, it was made of silver. And went into the bathroom. I tried to rationalize it by saying, oh, it's just sleep paralysis, to calm myself down. There was no way something like that happened. But when I lifted the back of my shirt, I had 4 welts across my back. I've never really shared this kind of thing before. I grew up in a suburban neighborhood in a subdivision built in the 1970s. We moved into the house in 2000. There was no real history to the land. It was just kind of like empty unused land prior to construction, so I had no reason to believe my house was haunted. Ever. As a brief background about the situation, I had seen spirits since I was about 8 years old. And sometimes they were kind of scary, but I got pretty used to it. Over time I kind of figured out that my house was built on top of I'm not sure if portal is the right term. It was more like a bunch of roads met up there, so spirits would come in and then go out along another road. For the most part spirits didn't stick around more than a few hours. Occasionally one of them might come up to me, tell me perhaps how they died, told me things like, if you ever see this person, let them know I'm looking for them, etc. And it kept pretty tame. This went on for years. Sometimes more creepy stuff would crawl through. I usually just called them shadows. I saw shadows more often when I was really young and they did terrify me a lot. But I can't even describe the full experience of this one night. I was maybe 13 or 14. I was awake past my bedtime, maybe 11 o'clock at night, but it could have been as late as 1 a.m. I had a light on next to my bed and I was listening to music and reading a book. At the time, I still used my closet. And I'd left it open. I remember nothing about that day before this moment. It'd been a completely normal day, nothing to note about it, but I'd been feeling a bit uneasy all night. I kind of felt like I'd been being watched, and this was nothing new. I lived in a house, routinely, which had spirits in it. I just did what I always did, which was try to distract myself from it. Reading a book. I was feeling really uneasy all of the sudden though, and I just looked up. And my closet was opposite of my bed. Directly opposite of my bed was actually the door out into the hallway, but about 6 feet to the left was my closet, which was built into the wall. My closet did make me uneasy on a normal night-to-night basis. It would feel like I would be watched from it, and I got into the habit of leaving it open so I can see that there wasn't anybody in there staring at me. Anyway, I looked up from my book, and there was just this thing. I can't really describe it. I couldn't really see it. Like I could look at it, but I couldn't. Physically my eyes would point at it, but they wouldn't focus on it. But this thing was like black. And it wasn't really tall, but I could see these red eyes up by the ceiling. And I know that people say their fight or flight response gets triggered. I was kind of all off the sudden beyond that. I kind of locked eyes with this thing. I wanted to run away. But I couldn't. My fight or flight response was actually to freeze. And when that initial moment passed, it's kind of like, this thing looks like some kind of predator, waiting for me to move, so I shouldn't move, and if I did, in order to go anywhere I have to go toward it. So either way, I stared at this thing. Once I locked eyes with it, it was kind of like the only thing I could see. I knew it was climbable down from the top of my closet. It crawled across my floor and kind of disappeared behind my bed / underneath my bed. I didn't ever see that thing again. But I didn't look away from where it disappeared. It was probably an hour before the pain in my shoulders, from not moving, was too much for me to stay like that, and so I kind of grabbed my sheets and pulled them all up around wrapped myself really tightly in them and put my back to the wall, and just stood guard. Have no other way to describe it than just waiting, watching. I just had to make sure that thing wasn't about to crawl out from under my bed. I had no protection from paranormal entities or physical entities. And it wasn't until the sun started to rise and there was sunlight coming in my room that I started to feel in any way like the thing had moved on. It wasn't until my mom had actually gotten up to get ready for work that I just very slowly shut off my light and slowly laid down. I know I went to the drive that day, because I was in shock and literally just stared at my closet until my mom made me get up and go with her. What happened after that, I don't really remember. My parents kept a very close eye on me for a while. They didn't really know how to help me. They had no idea that I'd been going through so much paranormal activity for a long time. They knew about it when I was really young, but they taught me that it wasn't like okay and I should hide it, so I did. I have never left a closet door open since. And I didn't use any closet for about 4 years after that. We moved out of that house when I was 18. I've lived in about 8 different locations since then. Only one ever felt haunted to me after that. Even so, nothing has ever felt as terrifying since then. Or as completely insane. I can't even. As a kid I saw a fully formed spirit, no transparency, he wore a black hooded cloak like the Grim Reaper and was also aware of us. My friends saw him too. It was honestly the most creepy thing I've ever experienced. During a very boring lecture on the Kabbalah to a group of psychology students, I saw a large, very large drooling reptilian dragon-like figure manifest behind this droning speaker and hover there for several minutes, maybe as much as 5 minutes, while she droned on, totally oblivious. At that point in my life, I had never felt such a bolt of terror move through me. I looked around and noticed that other people were seeing something as well. One woman was clinging to her friend and weeping/sobbing openly. This thing just hovered there off the ground and seemed almost senile in aspect. And very ancient. Horns, wings, scales. Bulging eyes. It was so real, it was right there. Not translucent, not vapor white or anything like that. Mind-boggling. As soon as the lecturer took questions and left, this group of 3 really ballsy women turned on the professor and in open hostility demanded to know what she was doing bringing this thing into their class. Which thrilled me because I considered this prof to be utterly evil. Luciferian. Also dumb as dirt. The professor hadn't seen anything, hadn't even noticed how agitated the people had been. Suddenly, about 10 of us were all comparing what we saw and we had all seen the identical thing. This was at night, and when the class ended, we moved the discussion to the parking lot. Standing there, talking about what had happened, the parking lot overhead lights, which were those orange-toned weird ones, suddenly exploded one after another. Maybe 3 of them in a row. Yikes! When I was driving home, I suddenly remembered where I had seen this thing before, John Tenniel's illustration of the Jabberwocky in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. Except for the fact that the Jabberwocky wears a vest and a pocket watch, it was nearly identical. When I got home I dragged out a box of my childhood books, and there it was, Through the Looking Glass. I took it to school the next day, and everyone agreed it was identical. The woman who was sobbing the night before, broke into crying when she saw it. It was so real. As real as any other person in that room. So real that it's odd to me that the experience didn't throw my life or psyche into complete chaos or something. Instead we all sort of just absorbed it into our reality. I was on staff at this school of psychology and I was told not to speak of it anymore. Which pissed me off royally. It was a complete shutdown of what could have been an important discussion and I wonder why, I wonder what that prof knew. TL/DR, a group of psychology students all saw the Jabberwocky as part of their consensual reality. In my old house we noticed not long after we'd moved in that it was actually haunted. My mother, sister, and I had all experienced some scary shit, but this is one I'll never forget. I was home alone one day, sister at school, mum at work. I was basically pacing around the house doing things with my earphones in. By this time I was standing between the side of my kitchen bench and the back of the lounge kinda at the end of the hallway. I guess I decided to turn around at that exact moment, like straight on I saw this black figure floating about 5 inches above the ground looking at me from the other side. I must have blinked fairly hard, thinking I was just seeing things, but when I opened my eyes it got closer. Now I think this is where the anxiety kicked in and I guess that made me freak out. My breathing quickly increased and as I blinked more it kept getting closer till it got a decent distance to my face and immediately disappeared. I felt an awful sense of dread and I grabbed my pets, closed the house up and sat outside until somebody got home. All of this happened in the span of about 4 seconds, but it was clear as day and still is in my mind. I was in a basement that I was renting from my girlfriend's mom. I was 18 years old, stone cold sober, wide awake, when I heard what I thought was the toilet running. You know that weird little sound a toilet makes when it's flushed, but the plug in the tank doesn't close afterwards and therefore runs continuously until closed manually. Anyways, I find it strange that I'd be hearing that at 9 to 10 p.m. when no one was home, not to mention the fact that I hadn't used the restroom any time recently. Surely enough, upon checking the tank, it was running and so I closed it and carried on reading a book on my bed in the next room over with my door cracked as usual. Now after maybe a minute or two the sound begins again. Basically the same as it had before, but this time upon checking, the tank was full of water and once in the restroom, the noise had stopped. Confused, I went back to my room to read. After the exact same scenario repeating itself twice more, I decided to turn off my fan, check every window in the basement, and even close the vents in my room and the restroom. Now with my full attention to the room and in complete silence, the sound begins again. This time particularly defined and of course pretty creepy. I should mention that this house was touted as a pretty haunted house by my girlfriend's family at the time, but after being familiar with the paranormal my whole life prior to living there, I didn't think much of it. They told some pretty extreme stories about the place when I was moving in, but I was just thankful to have a place to live for cheap. I was also there already for about a week at the time, with no incident leading up to this. Anyway, back to the craziness. So now with a confirmed, clear, and disturbingly subtle communication of some sort, I playfully utter the words, "I've got no beef with the spirit realm, take it easy on me. I scare easily." The sound then stops briefly, only to start again seconds later. Now I'm genuinely terrified and in a bit of a reactionary state, perhaps the fight or flight stage of panic. I hop out of bed, phone flashlight in hand, and shuffle out into the basement living room in an athletic, broad-based stance. In my heart I knew it was paranormal, but as a rational human, and like any cornered animal, I prepared myself for a fight. Whether it be an intruder or otherwise, I was doing my best to seem tough in the face of this perceived danger. This was a bluff, of course. I was fucking mortified. The basement living room light was conveniently burnt out, and I knew that, thus the phone flashlight. I can hear the running water sound, but it seemed to move away from me. Like it's farther and farther away as I slowly advance to a better vantage point. As I scan the dark basement living room with my light, I can feel the sense of dread and terror overtaking me. Now, after going right to left with the light, I expose the farthest left corner and also darkest part of the room with light, and just as I do, the faint running water sound becomes an unintelligible series of gibberishy Y-type whispers, if you will. Multiple voices, in a language I couldn't understand, and most importantly, in a much higher volume now. Like as if it went from whispers on a phone speaker, to whispers in a car's sound system. The noise was deafening and instantly all around me. Simultaneously, this chilling, cold gust of wind seemed to travel through my body as I stood there in shock. The force of this gust, coupled with the feeling of having my body plopped into an ice bath, basically buckled my knees into a deep squat. I was devastated but recovered almost instantly, only to whimper like a child and sprint up the stairs and out of the house in my socks. I waited in the street for a ride and only returned when people were home. I'd had some pretty intense experiences before and after that, but this one is almost too tangibly real for me to question. The back and forth and subsequent show of force by that entity was just too much to speculate about, or try to debunk. Absolutely chilling to reminisce about. So when I was 10 or 11 growing up in my childhood home, we had this spirit. It wasn't a ghost or anything you could see, but strange things would happen like lights flickering, random toys would turn on, I'd hear whispers etc. My siblings and I named the spirit Mary, and that's just what we called it to seem less scary, I guess. I currently live in my childhood home and I was downstairs doing some laundry with my 4-year-old son. I was folding clothes and he was playing with his toys on the table. He was playing and then he just stopped and said, "Oh hi," and starting talking to whom I assumed was an imaginary friend. I asked him, "Who are you talking to?" He says, "Oh, just my friend." So I said, "What's your friend's name?" And he says, "Oh, her name is Mary." Me neutral face face screaming in fear hand giving peace sign runner runner. I've never told my son about Mary because I didn't want to scare him. Needless to say, we don't spend a lot of time in the basement anymore and we don't talk about Mary. Whoa. I bite the head off a bat like a